Hi, we are good to go.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Julia Landau from Mass Advocates for Children. I'm going to be presenting tonight with Liza Hirsch, another attorney from MAC, and also joined by Lilia Malefchi, who's in charge of our communications, and Joanne Pino, who will also be helping us out tonight. I think every chat, I always start by saying something like, it is hard to believe that we are into 1 year, almost 1 month since schools were shut down and the emergency orders of the pandemic. Hopefully at this stage, a lot of you who are here tonight, if you have elementary age students, your kids are back in school full time, or at least have the choice of doing that. We know some districts have some waivers until the end of April. As we'll be talking about, more full-time in-person options should be offered for other students as we go through the next coming months. Some of you may still feel a need to continue remote learning. There's just been so many constant changes all these months, and particularly all these weeks with further reopening. Here's a poll just to find out what kind of disability your child has. The vaccines are rolling out. And we know even as schools reopen, there's still a lot of concerns and worries about how students are doing with the transitions back into schools when schools are being run so differently, and when IEP services, even in person, are in many cases being provided very differently due to the health and safety restrictions. So some kids that we're hearing from, as parents, some kids are progressing, and there's still other kids who are still continuing to experience a great deal of regression, a lack of progress, a lot of increased mental health and behavioral health needs at home, and also as they're transitioning back into school. So Liza and I are briefly going to go over some of the newer guidance from the state, and we want you, not only in your questions, but in your chats, to share with us your experiences and the strategies you found to be effective for your kids so that you can help each other. And I'm going to turn it to Lilia now to do some housekeeping things before we jump in, because we want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers.
Thank you, Julia. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and welcome back to all of our chat regulars. We are excited to offer live transcription and captioning now for our chats. If you click the live transcription button on your Zoom menu, you can turn this feature on or off. First, I have a special announcement. We're just coming off the energy from our virtual starting line tonight for the Run, Walk, Enroll to Equity. Thank you to all who joined us for that. You can catch it on our Facebook page if you missed it earlier tonight. Our Run, Walk, Enroll to Equity has officially kicked off, but you can still sign up. This is a COVID-safe way you can give back to MAC with your whole family. To participate, sign up using the link on the screen. Once you sign up, you'll receive instructions on how to participate. You can run, walk, or roll your 5K, which is 3.1 miles, at any point this weekend, and send us a screenshot of your GPS-tracked 5K. 9 lucky participants plus our top 3 fundraisers will receive a free MAC t-shirt. We have special discounted tickets available for families who have called our helpline or attended a MAC chat. So visit the link on the screen to purchase your $15 ticket. We'll also put the ticket link in the chat and the comments. So thank you for your support. Tonight, we'll pause throughout the presentation to take your questions. Questions can be submitted at any point during the presentation. To submit a question, please click the Q&A button on the menu of your screen. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please submit your question as a comment under the live stream. If you see someone else's question that you'd like us to answer, please give it a like. And also, please keep an eye on the chat box in Zoom and in the comments on Facebook for resources we'll share throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilia. So I'm going to start and just give, for those who were here for the chat last month, some of this will be a bit of a review, although we're farther into the process of rolling it out. As I'm sure all of you are aware, because of some new state requirements, schools are moving forward in terms of providing full-time in-person learning for all students as of this Monday, except for the school districts that got waivers, as I mentioned, for a couple of weeks. All elementary schools should be providing full-time in-person starting this week. Middle school students will start at the end of April, and fairly soon we're expecting the state to announce what the plans will be for high school students. Some districts are choosing already to increase their, or ahead of these timeframes, but for those that aren't able to, they will have to comport with the new state guidance. And just to underscore the same thing we've been saying for months, that the laws have been saying and the state has been saying in its guidance, is regardless of how your child is accessing learning, and parents can still choose to have their children continue to be full-time remote if that's what's necessary for the child and the family's health and safety and well-being. But no matter which option your child is getting their education, they still have to have their IEP fully implemented. We've heard a lot from some families who have some concerns about how their children were going to be transitioning into full-time learning, even if they had been already in a hybrid situation. They knew the full-time learning situation for all students would look different. And for some students, this would be their first time going back to school in over a year. So we would love to hear back from you how it's worked, if your children have transitioned back full-time this week. But again, the state has been very clear that the school district should be reaching out and working with families to figure out how to make sure the transition is smooth and addresses your child's disabilities and any new needs they may have as a result of the many things that they've had to experience during the pandemic. Being proactive, providing social stories or tours of the building. We know some school districts have been doing this. We know it's probably pretty variable. And really trying to address proactively what's going to help your child to deal with all these many changes in a way that really supports their positive behavioral responses, and to ensure that discipline is only used, if at all, as a very last resort. So this obviously is going to require some very effective communication with families, and again, making sure that IEPs are fully implemented. Liza, do you have anything to add about in-person learning? One of the things that we have been hearing, so this polling question is asking this, is some families have been concerned that as their children are going back into school full-time, that there's, in some situations, kids are still having to learn this way, with the Chromebook or through a screen, as opposed to simply being in a classroom where they're instructing directly with a teacher. So this is a polling question asking if your child's gone back, what the experiences have been. And Joan, you're going to show us the results of that poll when we get to them? Awesome, thank you. This stresses me out because I can't make the slides work. There we go. And just to review, if your child is still needing to receive a remote learning model and not take advantage of the in-person learning that's offered, then there are some newer over these last months requirements about not just that IEPs have to be fully implemented, but for all students, there has to be a certain number of hours, 40 hours over 2 weeks, of synchronous instruction that's not pre-recorded, where they're live with the teacher, and that the students have to be interacting in a live way with the teachers every school day. And again, some school districts have always been doing this and others haven't. It's going to be more challenging for school districts as they have more kids in person to be able to be providing the robust remote learning that they need to, but the requirements are still very similar. So again, we would like to hear what your experiences have been in these last weeks and months. And I'm going to turn it over to Liza to start talking about the new guidance around compensatory services.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good to have you all here. I know in previous chats we have been over COVID compensatory services, but just to review quickly, the purpose of COVID compensatory services are really to make a student whole, because IEP services were either not delivered during COVID, or because a student couldn't access remote services that were being delivered. And as a result, the student either didn't make progress or regressed and actually lost skills that they once had. So the purpose of these compensatory services, COVID compensatory services specifically, is to kind of make up for those losses. And IEP team meetings should be held to address the need for compensatory services. You as parents can request these meetings, and districts should be obtaining information from you as parents in assessing students' progress, because you as parents are the ones who have probably the most knowledge of your child's progress or lack of progress. So you can go to the next slide, Julia. So regarding services that were not delivered last school year when the pandemic first started, or services that a student couldn't access last school year, schools should have been convening team meetings this school year to address the need for compensatory services from services not delivered last school year, or services a student couldn't access last school year. We've been hearing that those IEP team meetings have not always been going forward. So we definitely would encourage all of you to proactively request those team meetings. The state has said that for these categories of students specifically, that basically these categories of students are likely to need compensatory services, and that school districts were actually required to hold IEP team meetings by December 15th, 2020, by this past December, to determine the need for compensatory services for these groups of students. So students with significant and complex needs, preschoolers with evaluation or service delays, students who turned 22 between March 15th and December 23rd, and students who didn't receive or access any IEP services last school year. So for those categories of students, there should have been a determination, either an IEP team meeting or some other form of determination by December 15th of this past year of 2020. And that said, we've been hearing that in many cases, those IEP team meetings or those determinations didn't necessarily happen. And so it's not too late to communicate with the school district about your child's need for compensatory services stemming from last school year. So we would encourage you to request team meetings to determine the need for compensatory services for relating to last school year if you feel that is a need for your child. So next slide, Julia.
Ryan.
So that was last school year. For this current school year, we know that, and we know that you all know that many students have continued to not receive all services on their IEP, or even if school districts are trying to deliver all services on the IEP, many students are having difficulty accessing those services and have had difficulty accessing those services remotely. So schools should also be considering the need for compensatory services related to services not delivered this school year, or services that students had a difficult time accessing this school year, in addition to services from last school year. And the state has said that the following students are potentially more likely to need compensatory services. These are students who are in districts, attend districts that have been fully remote for 3 or more months this school year, or students who've been chronically absent, or students who have just had significant difficulty accessing remote learning due to barriers, which we know is the case for many, many students, due to barriers related to their disability, or technology barriers, or language access barriers, or other pandemic-related barriers. So for these students, the state has basically said that schools should be convening IEP team meetings to determine, whether or not the student needs compensatory services. So if you believe your child may need compensatory services stemming from this school year, and you have not heard from the district, we would encourage you to reach out and request a team meeting. Next slide. So IEP teams should also address compensatory services for the current school year if the IEP simply has not been fully implemented. And again, the team meetings can be requested by a parent or student. And just a note that these conversations about compensatory services may be addressed at any team meeting. It could be an annual review team meeting. It could be any other team meeting You can request a specific meeting to talk about COVID compensatory services, but there's lots of ways for compensatory services to be addressed. And but we know the districts are overwhelmed right now, and so it's not necessarily the front of their mind. So we definitely encourage parents to be proactive about it. And as always, you can file a PRS complaint or use BSEA mediation if school districts are just refusing to provide compensatory services or work with you on this. Next
And just
slide.
to buttress your point, you can see in the poll, Liza, I know it's hard to watch a poll when you're talking, but that half the family said that they haven't had the IEP team has not yet met to determine whether the child needs compensatory services. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, sorry, I didn't even see the poll come up on my screen. So what was the result, Julia?
More than half said that a team had not yet met to discuss compensatory services. Even though, again, for last year, the school district was obligated to convene a team meeting for every child if they had an IEP. And for this school year, for any parent who requests it, or clearly it's required for the kids in those 3 groups. So that statistic's a little troubling.
It's really troubling and also to me not surprising, but I just would encourage parents to reach out and not wait for the district to initiate. So next slide, Julia.
Well, do you want to stop for questions now or keep going?
Yeah, I can do a little break. Just 1 second.
And while she's doing that, Lilia just put into the chat the link to the letter to request compensatory service meeting.
That's great. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Lilia.
So actually, before we get to questions, I'm going to ask that everyone please click the link to the survey I just shared in the chat box in the comment section on Facebook. The survey is optional, but it does give us important information we can use to improve our chat series, so we hope you'll fill it out. And I'll just give you a second to click that link and save it to fill it out. And you'll also be redirected to that survey when we close out today. All right, our first question is, my son's school district says their policy is that a child must show significant signs of regression to qualify for extended school year services. They say my son doesn't qualify, but I disagree. I have a big picture question. How can I help to request this policy be changed so that children don't have to wait to regress in order to get summer help?
That's a really good question. The regression, that would require a change in law, which we can, which is a process. Our office and a lot of offices are involved in how to change policies and laws. That's kind of a requirement of federal and state law. However, there are going to be there's a lot of federal and state money flowing into school districts, and all school districts, as far as we know, are going to be offering more extensive summer options for all kids, not just kids with disabilities. So I think it's important to distinguish between the IEP extended school year services, which do have this regression standard, and then all the services, special eds, the regular educational summer opportunities are going to be provided this summer because of the pandemic, need to provide accommodations for any child with a disability who may want to participate in them. So I guess I would encourage you that if you don't have summer services in your child's IEP, you still have a legal right to access the array of summer services that are going to be offered for all kids through your school district this summer. In addition, many families who may not qualify under that regression standard for summer services are accessing those services as the compensatory services that Liza was talking about. So that's another way for this summer that you might be able to obtain the special ed extended school year summer services for your child. Liza, do you have anything you want to add to?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing about compensatory services because the standard is not substantial regression. It's a little bit different. It's, if the student had lack of progress or regression and didn't receive some services or couldn't access some services. So because the standard is a little bit different, it's not a substantial regression standard, it may be worth considering the compensatory service route to get some more services in place this summer. And I think a lot of families are considering doing that.
Thank you. Our next question is, my child could not access remote learning and the school team members acknowledge this in writing. We're meeting tomorrow to discuss COVID compensatory services. My child already has extended school year and receives private home services in the afternoons. What happens if the school does not offer something that works for my child?
That's a great question. The services, the idea is that in this meeting, sounds like the school district's already acknowledged that your child was not accessing everything that they needed and may well have not made the progress they should have or have regressed. So then it becomes a hope that you can agree with the school district about the amount and the type of services and when those services will be provided. So hopefully you'll, whether it's over vacations or other times where you might think, I don't know your child to know what the type and range of services are you think your child needs. If you don't reach an agreement in an IEP meeting about whether your child needs services or what type or when they should be provided, there are some families who believe and their team agrees that their child needs compensatory services, but because of the nature of their child's disability, it doesn't make sense to receive those services until a lot of the health and safety restrictions have been eliminated. So they need to delay the provision of those services. And all those things are fair game to work out with the school district. And then the school district needs to, document in writing what the agreement is. But if you can't agree about any of those specifics, then you can try to resolve it through mediation or through some further meetings or either through the complaint process that's mentioned on the slide. Liza, anything to add there?
No, I think that was complete.
And someone
Maybe
just,
one more.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question and then go on.
Someone just shared in the Q&A the DESI advisory on extended school year, if anyone is looking for that. Our next question is, the school has told me that they're not required to provide all the services that my child's doctor recommended. They said that their team makes the final recommendation about what he gets. I would like to understand what my rights are when a doctor makes a recommendation for school in regards to a learning disorder. Specifically, if the school team decides that he only needs 2 to 3 times a week with a reading teacher, how can or should I appeal that in order to get the doctor's recommended frequency of 5 times a week?
That's a great question. We'll give a very brief overview here, and that's a kind of question where it'd be good to, you could contact our helpline to get more details. But if it's an outside provider like a doctor or a therapist or a psychologist makes recommendations, it is true the way the law works that then the team has to consider those outside recommendations. But then the team either will come to consensus or you may disagree with what the district proposes. And then at that point, there's a lot of very specific procedures you can go through to reject the IEP or accept it in part and reject only that specific area where you might have a disagreement. And then there's also a lot of steps in terms of informal and formal complaints that you can go through to try to reach a resolution. But there are a lot of steps that can be made kind of in the middle there to try to reach a resolution before going through things more formally. So that's kind of a general overview, and I would encourage you to contact our helpline if you want some more specifics, unless Liza, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other thing I would add is that the IEP team does include the parent. So it's the school district's determination but decisions are supposed to be made with the parent as an integral member of the team. And if the parent is coming to the table with an outside report and a recommendation, the school district, and legally they have to consider it. They have to consider that recommendation. But they should be seriously considering, the parent's input on the issue. And if they ultimately don't end up agreeing with the recommendation in the report, the only other thing I would say is suggest is to just document, anything that you think supports your child's need for that service. So whether it be kind of lack of progress in that area or anything else that you think supports their need for that service. Just, you know, keep a log, document it, collect evidence, and that'll just continue to support your argument that your child does in fact need that service that has been recommended by the outside provider.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna try to advance the slide so you can keep going here. There we go.
Okay, so one issue that we have been hearing about is that IEP teams, some IEP teams are writing IEPs based on the limited services that are available during the pandemic, during COVID-19, rather than based on what the student's needs are in normal times, like if the child were to be attending school in person. And we want to state very clearly that IEPs need to be written based on your child's needs under normal circumstances if they were attending school in person, and not based on limitations due to the pandemic, due to health and safety requirements, due to cohorts of students, etc. So for example, if the IEP team determines that your child needs speech therapy 2 times a week, but due to the pandemic, maybe the speech therapist is only available 1 time a week, the IEP still has to be written to include speech therapy 2 times a week, because that was the need that the team determined for your child. Or if a child needs a social skills group, for example, but you know, during the pandemic, that for some reason hasn't been able to happen, maybe it couldn't happen remotely for some reason, the social skills group, the service, and also the social skills goal still must be included in the IEP. And then a final example is just having to do with inclusion and placement. So if the team determines that your child needs to be included in the general education setting for X number of minutes per day, but that's not possible due to the pandemic, and say, you know, the team determines that the child needs certain push-in services in the general ed setting, like occupational therapy or speech therapy, but it's not possible for your child to be participating in the gen ed setting and receiving those push-in services in the gen ed setting during the pandemic. Well, the IEP still needs to be written as if as if your child was still able to receive those services in the gen ed setting, and it still needs to be written with those push-in services. The IEP team can reflect changes in the way services are delivered during COVID on the IEP, like in additional information or on the N1 form, can note, you know, how services are being delivered differently during the pandemic, but the IEP itself, the goals, the services, all have to be written as if we were in normal times and your child was attending school in person. So yeah, if it go to the next slide, I think I'm passing it back to you, Julia.
Yeah, I was just going to say this, what we're talking about in terms of writing IEPs and about compensatory services is new information that was just provided in guidance from the state a few days ago. And I think Joanne is going to put that guidance into the chat just so you can see it. It's a very long document, but it's in there. So briefly, we want to leave more time for questions, but so we'll briefly go over the shifting sands every which way of education over this last year, but MCAS has also always been changing. So there's a lot of confusion around this. There's been a lot of confusion on the part of advocates and attorneys as well. But there's 2 things that are being kind of in flux right now. One is for students who are high school juniors, not 12th graders or 18 to 22-year-olds, but high school juniors may not need to pass MCAS to graduate. And the State Board of Education is going to be taking a vote on April 20th about a proposal from the state commissioner that's basically saying, you know, students are supposed to take the 10th grade MCAS in order to get their competency determination and graduate. And then if they don't pass it in 10th grade, they have more opportunities in 11th and 12th grade to take it again. And I think the commissioner is making this recommendation because students couldn't take it in 10th grade and they're going to have difficulty taking the retest this year. So we will know in a few weeks what the requirements may or may not be to pass 10th grade MCAS for high school juniors. For other grades, there's going to be delays in terms of implementing MCAS if districts can administer the test through June, and there is going to be remote MCAS offered for the younger grades, for grades 3 to 8 this year. The other thing we did want to address, because this directly impacts students with disabilities, is that for the students who are in 12th grade, or for students who are in the 18 to 22 range, there is another way to, quote, pass MCAS because of the pandemic. And they did something similar last year, and there's an option to receive what's called a modified competency determination. If a student passes MCAS, then they get what the law calls a competency determination. So the way it's going to be modified this year is that if a student, let's say they hadn't passed the math MCAS, if the district has a choice of submitting information to the state to show that the student has taken a math course that would cover the requisite skills required of a student who is going to pass MCAS, and that they passed that course. And if the district submits that information to the state, then the student can be considered to have passed MCAS. And then for students who have IEPs, the students can graduate if the team has determined that this spring, or that they should graduate basically by October of this year, if that's already in the IEP. So in other words, for the students who are in 12th grade or up to age 22 right now, if their IEP says they're supposed to graduate before October of this year, then this is a way to meet the MCAS requirements in a different way. And then if they've also met the other requirements for graduation, then they can get a diploma, and then that will terminate their eligibility for special ed. So the reason we're underscoring this here is because it's really important, and the state has said that if they're going to try to show that the student has the competency needed in this different way by showing the course work, then they have to provide you as a parent notice if your child has an IEP, explain that your child will graduate and end their special ed services, and that you have the right to ask for an IEP meeting before they actually graduate if you or your child believe that your child is not ready to graduate and needs to continue to receive special ed services. So it's kind of complicated. We may get questions about that if we have parents with kids in that age group, but it's important if your child's in that age range to understand the options. Liza, do you want to add anything there? And then very briefly, then we can do the rest of the time for questions. I hopefully you're beginning to hear if your child is eligible for extended school year summer special ed services, either through their IEP or through compensatory services, that districts are again directed that they have to plan and offer in-person full-time extended school year services, full-time, whatever's in the IEP for the summer. But through the summer, the school districts have to continue to allow families the choice to continue remote learning if that's what the family believes is necessary for the health and safety of their child and their family. And then again, as we just talked about, there will be many other summer education programs offered in most districts this summer to try to address the recovery needs of all kids. And those programs by law have to accommodate students with disabilities, which is separate from what the IEP extended school year services are. Liza, anything to add there? Great, so here's some resources that are there, and I hope we were successful in leaving some time for questions, more questions.
Thank you. I'll get right into it.
So we can end this, right? And great.
Our first question is, we moved districts before COVID hit last year. Our previous town was excellent and our daughter was almost fully included in kindergarten. Her IEP states she should be included for her entire day, she's now in first grade, except for pullouts for math and reading. I requested a copy of her schedule and she is only included with her peers during snack, recess, lunch, and specials. I've reached out several times and have been very clear that her IEP needs to be followed as written, and they are basically ignoring my concerns and don't even acknowledge that her inclusion time is nothing like her IEP. I'm unsure how much I can push back because of the pandemic affecting everything with education. What can I do?
That's a great question, and that you're not the only parent who's being faced with that situation of having your IEP implemented, especially as in terms of the amount of inclusion or participation with non-disabled students that's required. It sounds like your child's IEP, if I'm understanding correctly, says that your child should be spending the vast majority of their time in the general education kindergarten. And so
First grade, I think.
First grade, was it? It came from kindergarten out first grade.
Yeah.
First grade, and is pulled out for only a portion of the day. So I think legally, it makes no sense to me why your child isn't placed primarily in that first grade placement. And then if they have to provide the pull-out services differently because of health and safety requirements, then they should be talking with you about how to provide those pull-out services in a way that can meet your child's needs and be consistent with the health and safety requirements. You know, there are some limitations around inclusion because of, and Liza mentioned this, because of health and safety requirements and not being able to mix cohorts. But the school district is still obligated to be allowing your child to be educated in what the law calls the least restrictive environment, and is required to be working with you creatively to figure out how to do that. It shouldn't be either or. Liza, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, it was a little hard for me to tell whether it's that the district is just not implementing the IEP that was carried over from the previous district, and that even if it was school in person, the school district would still be refusing to implement it, or if basically they're saying they're not able to implement the IEP as written because of health and safety requirements. And I think depending on which one of those it is, there might be a slightly different approach. But if the school district is literally just refusing to even kind of consider or implement the IEP as written, and is not saying that it's related to COVID or health and safety measures, but they're just refusing to implement the IEP, I mean, I think that's something definitely to first raise with the district in IEP team meeting. And if they're still refusing to implement it, I think that's you know, a reason you could file a complaint with PRS or BSEA mediation, or, you know, BSEA hearing. But then if it's health and safety requirements, and as Julia said, it really should be a conversation about what from the IEP can be implemented, and if anything needs to be implemented differently, that should really be a conversation with you through the IEP team process, and it should be documented, whatever decision is reached.
Right, but if it has to be provided differently, it's still, and the state is and the feds have enforced this, they really need to address the inclusion needs of your child. And that's some really good points that Liza raised. So what the law says, if a child is moving from one district to another, and we don't know if all these things happen the way they should. The new district has to implement the old IEP in a comparable setting in the new district until they have time to convene their own IEP meeting. So, you know, do call our helpline, because if we knew more of the details, we could probably give some more specific guidance.
Thank you. And we have someone asking if we can pull up that last slide again with the resources. That's possible. I'll put the helpline link in the chat again. We have someone asking, what do compensatory services include?
Go ahead, Liza.
Well, I was just going to say that there's no cookie cutter list of what compensatory services include. It's just whatever services your child needs to be made whole for whatever the missed services were, or in this case, in COVID compensatory services, if your child was not able to access services, it's what services they need to be kind of put in the position that they were or as close to the position that they were before before that loss. So I don't think that there's a specific list of services. It's really just a determination of what services your individual child needs. And I guess the other thing I would say is that, you know, sometimes people are under the impression that if you know, if my child missed 20 sessions of speech therapy, then it has to be made up, you know, 1 for 1. Now they're owed 20 sessions of speech therapy, and it doesn't exactly work that way. Sometimes districts will deliver compensatory services in that way, in like a 1-to-1 kind of way to make up services that were missed. But legally, it doesn't have to be 1-to-1. It's more of a kind of broader determination of what your child needs to be made whole. Julia, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that really covers it really well. So it really depends on the circumstances of families that we worked over the years. The compensatory services could be a certain amount of related services, things like Liza said, speech therapy or ABA services or physical therapy. Sometimes it can be an agreement that the child needs a certain full day program over school vacation breaks or services over the weekend or services over the summer or additional services over the summer. It really depends on the gravity of the loss of learning or the regression. Sometimes there can even be extra time for older students after they exit at age 22 or 18, sometime after this is really important for the older students and the students who may have exited special ed during the COVID pandemic, that their compensatory services can be provided after they've already exited the school district. So it can be a full program or a certain amount of services or tutoring. It really depends on the needs of it's like the eye of everything of IEP. It really depends on the individual needs of your child. And hopefully the school themselves, or if you have a developmental pediatrician or other outside therapists, they can also help recommend for you what types of programs or services will help make your child whole, the way Liza said.
Thank you. And we've shared a lot of resources in the chat, so look there, but we'll also be sending all of those in the follow-up email as well, along with the recording and these slides. Our next question is, would you recommend high school students who are at risk of losing services due to graduation defer the diploma?
I hate this kind of answer, but the first thing that comes out of my mouth is so much depends on your child and what's appropriate for them. You know, so I don't know any way to give a yes, no, but I think it's a really smart question to consider what's in the best interest of your child. As we said, your child can exit special education and get a diploma and still get compensatory services, but once they graduate or exit, they don't have a right to the regular IEP services anymore. So it's a really important thing to consider, and it gets kind of complicated. What's the ongoing IEP services and compensatory services for older students? Liza, do you have something to add? It's a good question. I'm not quite sure how to.
Yeah. No, I think we would really need to know some specifics about the specific student circumstances, I think, but it is a really important consideration.
And again, other people, and I'm not able to talk and read what's in the chat, but I'm sure other parents and advocates are going to have some good input into that. Lilia and Joanne, if you see anything that people are good ideas, let's share those as well.
Thank you. I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A. Our next question is, there's a progress monitoring issue made much worse by COVID. An increasing number of districts are shifting to providing 2 formal report cards per school year to general ed students. This has a disastrous effect on IEP progress reports, which are received as often as report cards. January and June IEP progress reporting is not enough. Can we work at the DESI level or the legislative level to address this?
I think it's a great idea to think about addressing that at the policy level and raising it with the state and raising it with the legislature. In the meantime, the person with that question is right, that that's the minimum that school districts are legally required to do, is to issue progress reports as frequently as non-disabled kids get report cards or their, other kinds of progress reports. However, you can also raise this in your IEP meeting, because if you believe your individual child requires more frequent progress reports, then that's absolutely something that you can raise and request be included in the IEP, and see if the team agrees with that. So it's just another option and you can reject the IEP in part if you believe that kind of more frequent progress reporting is important for your child. You can raise that and reject your IEP in part for that reason. But it's a really good idea to think about that more systemically. Liza, things to add?
No, I would just say, especially during COVID, if you feel like your child really needs that additional progress monitoring because of the COVID circumstances, it could be a really important issue to raise in the IEP team process, as Julia was saying.
And if there's going to be a lot of IEP meetings being conducted over the spring. There's usually many of them held over the spring, which is why the new state guidance about how to write the IEPs is so important. Because we were hearing from a lot of families that IEPs were being written like the family who was talking about the lack of inclusion opportunities because of COVID. If IEPs are written based on what's more limited now, and then things fully reopen, the IEPs are still going to reflect the limited circumstances that may exist because of COVID. So it's really important to make sure that your IEPs, your children's IEPs, reflect their needs as if we can remember normal, as if things were normal without pandemic, the way schools operate. And but as you have IEP meetings in the spring and are thinking about how schools are going to reopen probably even more differently and robustly next fall, following up on Liza's points, if you believe that transition may be difficult for your child and you need more frequent progress reporting or some kind of journal going back and forth, we know that the communication between the school and the parent, both in terms of progress reports and even maybe more frequently the progress reports, is going to be critical to ensure a smooth transition as kids with so many increased needs are going back to school. So those are really important things that you can think about if it's important for your child to include into the IEP. Some parents sometimes ask for monthly check-ins because they're very concerned about how their child's going to address all the changes with the transition.
Thank you. We had someone ask if they could invite someone to this chat. Absolutely. People can register at the link at massadvocates.org/chat. And our chats are also always live streamed to our Facebook page if you search Mass Advocates on Facebook. So thank you for asking, and please do invite your friends.
So it is 8:45. We know some people will jump off now. Liza and I can stay until 9. The other thing I would ask you in the Q&As, first of all, if we don't get to your question, please feel free to email or call our helpline, but also give us your ideas about what you think will be helpful in the coming months as we getting closer to the summer, as we're looking more at the long-term recovery for kids. It would really be helpful to hear from you. Do you want these chats to continue? And if so, what kind of information from lawyers or outside experts would you find most useful? So I wish we'd have that as a polling question, but please provide that, any ideas you have. All right, more questions, Lilia.
Our next question is, my district is offering extra weeks for all students this summer. The district is saying the extra weeks added to his summer program, those are his compensatory services, even though all students are getting those 2 weeks. Is that fair? What can I do?
You going a little?
So no, I would say no. I mean, I would say that the extra weeks being added for all students is separate from compensatory services. So as Julia was saying earlier, opportunities that are being offered to all students must be made accessible to students with disabilities. And it sounds like the district may be providing that opportunity to your child, which is great. And if your child also has a need for compensatory services for services they didn't receive or had difficulty accessing, and they've had difficulty making progress or had regression, then that's a separate determination, and the IEP team, you can request an IEP team meeting to make a determination about what compensatory services are needed. And those compensatory services could be made up over the summer months or not, depending on what the team decides and what you as a parent think is a timing that makes most sense. But I would say that, compensatory services is a separate determination than the extra weeks being provided to the general ed population. And then there's ESY, which is separate from that. And Julia, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's spot on. I'm wondering if the state has said in their guidance, I guess the question is for this person who asked the question is, if the team already agreed that your child needs special ed compensatory services, then they cannot then say that these gen ed services are going to fill the space of those compensatory services. They're two very different things. However, when the team decides whether or not your child needs compensatory services, it is fair, according to the state, for the school district to say, all right, well, we agree your child didn't make the progress they should have, but do we agree that these regular ed additional instructional opportunities that are going to be offered to all kids are going to be enough to make your child whole? And you can either agree with that or you can disagree. And if you disagree, then there's not an agreement about whether your child needs compensatory services or not. And then you can go through these complaint or mediation processes. But if the team already decided your child needs special ed compensatory, then they can't then say, we're going to provide these gen ed services instead of, as opposed to, in addition to. I don't know if that made it more clear or more confusing. Liza, help there. That we're okay?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because
It's
there
a
is
little
this,
confusing.
it is confusing because the state has said that that's it, the IEP team can discuss that, whether or not the gen ed extra services are enough to make the child whole. And that's right. But if the team has agreed they need special ed, then you can't substitute.
Right. I think that's right.
But it is very confusing. Hope that didn't muddy the water more.
Call our helpline if you'd like to discuss that further. Our next question is, what would the school base the educational compensation on if the harm may be ongoing and understanding a student's deficits may be best assessed when the student returns in person? Is it more of an hour for hour thing or something more abstract?
I'm not sure I exactly understand the question. It sounds like this child is not yet back in person, and we know that many districts have said we can't yet make the determination about compensatory until we actually see the child. So I don't know if that's part of the question. I don't know if there's any, I'm not sure that there's, without knowing the specifics of your child's lack of learning or regression, if we can have a sense of what type of remedy would make sense to make your child more whole. I'm not sure I understood the question totally. Liza, did you?
I don't know if I did, but I guess I would say it seems like at least part of the question was about, whether you have to wait until your child is back in school for the school district to assess whether there's been a regression or whether it's a good idea to wait. And I think that is really going to depend on your individual child and what your individual child's needs are, and whether, if you feel like there has been clear regression or clear lack of progress and you've documented that, and you feel like you have a good sense of that, and your child needs services to make up for that, and you think those could be delivered in whatever format your child is currently accessing school, then I would say go ahead and advocate for those services now. But if you are really uncertain and you actually don't really know if they've made progress or not, and you would like to wait and see once they're back in school and have the school district assess, that's certainly up to you. I think it really depends on your individual child, but I don't think you have to wait if you feel like you have enough evidence of the regression or lack of progress. But it also, and I know Julia was mentioning this earlier, it also, one of the considerations is how the compensatory services will be delivered. And if your district is not yet fully in person, or you feel like your child would benefit from receiving compensatory services in person, that may be a reason to wait. So anyway, there's a lot of different factors to weigh, but I would just follow your own instincts about what you feel your child's needs are in terms of assessing the need for compensatory service.
Exactly. The only thing I would add to that, which gets, again, a little bit technical, but most cases we hope and believe that if you go through an IEP meeting, you'll be able to reach an agreement with your school district about whether your child needs compensatory services and what type and amount. If you don't reach agreement and you file a complaint with this, I'm pointing as if you can see it, but the option says PRS complaint with the state, about the fact that you believe your child needs compensatory services that the school district isn't agreeing to provide. That once you file the complaint, the state can only look back 1 year. So if you feel like your child really needs compensatory services for April, May, and June of last year, and you don't file the complaint, if you file the complaint later than a year from then they can't order services for that amount of time. So that's the only thing to think about in terms of, that's another reason to think about whether you want to go forward or not. You may be more focused on the compensatory services for the current school year, and then you don't need to worry about that right away.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. My district is saying that basically, well, we offered services and it's not our fault that your child can't access them. I feel that this is against guidance. Do you have thoughts on this?
Gonna go ahead, Liza? See you, Nick.
Well, yeah, I mean, legally, the school district must provide educational services that are accessible to your child. And that is very clear. And federal and state guidance has also been clear that all IEP services have to be delivered during the pandemic, and they have to be delivered in a manner that's accessible to your child. And so if those services are not accessible to your child, then I mean, I would argue the district is in legal violation, and you should definitely be advocating for whatever you think your child needs in order to be able to access their education and their services on their IEP.
And I think it's just, yeah, no, it's not like this person who asked this question is aware that the guidance from the state is exactly reflected in Liza's response. And if the district is not complying with what the state and the law would require, which is for the district, if a child is not able to be engaged and participate in the remote instruction that's being offered, then it's the obligation of the school district to work with you to remedy that situation. And that is the kind of situation where you may want to contact our helpline or think about contacting somebody higher within the school district or possibly filing a complaint.
Thank
More?
you.
Do I have one more, two more? What do you think? I can't see what time it is. One more, maybe?
Yeah, we can do one more. We're getting some suggestions for future chats.
That's
okay.
great. Yes, as you
Great.
leave, please
Yes.
remember to give suggestions for what would be helpful going forward.
Yeah, and you'll be directed to a link to our survey when you leave, so please fill that out. It should only take 3 minutes. Our last question is, my daughter receives direct PT services and that's in her IEP. She's been remote and will remain remote for the rest of the year. She has only received remote PT since last March. We have finally been able to find a direct service PT to come in the house starting very soon. My question is, would she qualify for compensatory PT services since she has not received direct PT since last March? If so, how should I approach that?
Again, that would be a determination that you would have to make with the IEP team. But the criteria for being eligible for compensatory services is, you know, you can show that your child's IEP, PT services had to be provided differently. And so then the next step is whether or not your child either regressed in those areas or wasn't able to make adequate progress in terms of the goals and objectives that are addressed by the physical therapy. So if you feel like what you've seen, and that's why this state has said that they really have to get the parents' input about what you've seen and what you've observed about your child's progress, or maybe some of the outside service providers can also help provide information about whether or not your child's made adequate progress. That's why the question before about the progress reports is so important, because you can look to see whether you can show that your child hasn't made the anticipated progress on their goals and objectives. So it's not just that the child didn't get all the services, but you do have to then be able to show how your child didn't make the progress that they would have made if they had services being provided fully the way the IEP calls for. Liza, anything to add there in our closing?
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think it would be, an argument that either the direct PT service wasn't delivered, or if it was being delivered remotely and the district was claiming that they were delivering that service, you could make the argument that your daughter really wasn't accessing, the service in the way that she needed. And then additionally, as Julia was saying, was not able to make progress or has even regressed as a result.
I know that looks like there's a lot of questions that we haven't been able to get time to answer. So I hope that you got some information that will help you as you work with your own kids or with other kids that you may be working with. We know you have a lot of experience and hopefully been able to share some ideas with each other. And please contact us with questions you have. Let us know ideas you have of how we can make these chats more useful in the future. And thanks for spending so much time late in the evening with us tonight.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to buy your special discounted ticket to our Run, Walk, and Roll. I put that link in the chat. We hope you can join us this weekend virtually.
Thanks for the reminder, Lilia.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.